Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's cards are Zentangle cards. I finally got around to learning how to do this and I love it. I purchased two books, one from Amazon and one I got locally from my craft store. I'm just going to flip through some of these pages. I think they're basically the same kind of book. They show different grid patterns, different designs. It gets more advanced by using tan paper and black paper and combining different designs into one kind of whole piece of art. And I didn't get too complicated with these. I really like to keep it pretty simple. I just went with one pattern. I think I got one pattern from one book, one from the other, and I'll link to the one that I got at Amazon. But these books were really, really helpful in helping me learn how to do this. I do have to warn you that this can be pretty addicting, but it is very relaxing. I went ahead and purchased pens that were recommended for Zentangle. They're made by Pigma and they're called Micron, and I got a pack of 3. There's a 01, which is the smallest, the finest tip, and then there's a 03 and a 05. And I used all 3 of these. You can use any kind of paper for this, but I decided to use the Canson XL Mixed Media 98-pound watercolor paper because when I was doing the shading, I found that watercolor was the easiest way to shade, and I'll show you that as soon as I finish the drawing. So for my first card, I wanted it to be kind of square-ish, and so because it's all freehand, and I'm not even sure you're supposed to use a ruler, but you know, I like to have my measurements. So I went ahead and measured about a 2 1/4 inch square just as a guide. So I just put a dot in each corner. And then I took my 01, which is the finest tip, and I'm just kind of drawing curved in lines for my square. And I'm varying them so they're not exact, and it is all freehand, so it's not going to come out perfect, but I wanted them to come in a curve. Now for the pattern, you're going to start in a corner and you're going to draw a line diagonally downward, and then you're going to rotate a quarter turn and then start where you left off and draw that same diagonal line downward. Quarter turn, start where you left off and draw the line downward. And you can vary the size of these. Mine were large at first and then I got smaller. So I'm going to complete the first cycle around, and now you can see I've got a square. And I'm going to do the same thing. So wherever I left off, I'm going to scoot it down here. Wherever I left off, I'm going to go down to the right. And see, this one's a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to start where I left off, and then I'm going to go down to the right. And I'm just going to keep going. And this takes a long time, so it's, you know, it's very relaxing and it's very focusing. Like, you really have to focus on what you're doing and be careful about drawing all these lines exactly right because you're working with a pen, not a pencil. At least I did. And you can see mine aren't exactly perfect because now I have rectangles instead of squares. But here I am drawing the last one, and just kind of keep going until you can't really go anymore. And then my last one right here. And then that completes this pattern. So you could vary it by making your lines closer together if you want, or further apart. But just follow that same exact pattern all the way around. Just keep turning and turning until you get to the end. This combination of patterns was actually in the book that I have. So I'm just sort of copying what was in the book with a little bit of variation. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to draw another one of those curved squares. I'm just following the original shape that I drew that was 2 1/4 inches apart. And you can see I didn't exactly meet on the ends there, and I'm going to fix that later. But you just kind of have to relax a little bit about it. It's not going to be perfect. And if your lines are crooked, it's no big deal. It's really made to be very relaxing. You're not supposed to worry about being perfect. Which is hard for me because I'm a perfectionist and I found this relaxing. So that says really something about this type of art. Okay, so this part that I just drew, and I'm going to take my 05, and this is the one that I used for coloring, the 05, because it's the thickest tip. And I'm going to speed through a lot of this because it is very slow moving. The tips are fine on these markers and you need to color it in. And because I used watercolor paper, I had to be really careful not to put too much pressure on the paper because it is softer than regular paper. And these fine tips would easily kind of rip up the paper if I pressed too hard. Once I'm done coloring that part, I'm ready for the next one, which is drawing another square around this one. So I'm bringing back my 01 fine tip, and I'm just going to do the same thing I did before, which is, pull it out about 1/4 of an inch or so, and it's going to vary depending on, how steady your hand is. But I'm going to draw the lines all the way around. You can see that I didn't really hit them together, but I'm going to worry about that later. I just wanted to get the longer lines drawn in first. And then I just kind of added the detail of them pulling out into a point. And so this is what I'm working with now, and I'm going to fill this in. I'm going to start with a 03, and I actually moved to different tips after I started working with this, but I'll tell you about that in a second. But the first thing I did was draw a line, and I colored the tip because I liked the tips to be dark because it kind of accentuated the tips. Then I'm going to draw a small line, a bigger line, like a bigger gap line, and then a small one. So I have a little area, a big area, a little area, and then I'm going to color a larger area in. And so I want to make sure that my lines are curved, and by doing that, it's going to look like this is kind of a rope around this square. So you can see it's kind of curved, a small, a little bigger, and then smaller, and then I'm going to color the next segment in. And so what I ended up doing is I started with a number 3, thinking I was going to do this whole thing with the number 3. But number 3 is a little bit too fine to do the coloring. It just took a little bit longer than I liked. So I went and grabbed the 5. So I ended up drawing my lines with the 01, and then I filled in the solids with the 5. And I seriously sped this up like 20 times real time because, as I said, it's very time consuming, and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to be very relaxing where you don't really think about anything else except coloring and drawing. And it's really fun, and the time just really flies by when you're doing this. So anyway, just want to keep those lines curved so it looks like it's a big rope. When I got to my tips, they're all a little bit different. It just depended on where I landed, and I just sort of made it work. And I tried to make the tips dark. All right, so that completes the drawing, and you can leave it like this. It looks good, but with the shading, it looks fantastic. I love it. So I got some black soot distress ink, put some on my craft mat. I have my tissue, of course, and my aqua painter. And I'm going to be very careful here. I don't want to get too much, so I'm going to start very light. And I'm going along the inside of each of these curves. So I'm going to grab some of that black soot, and I'm going to color to the right of each one of these curves. And I'm going to wipe my aqua painter off on the tissue quite a bit. It's best to start light. You can always add more ink later. So I'm just going to fade it out as I go toward the right, and I'm not coloring the whole thing, just the left side, just the left area. So I'm going to start again. I rotated it a 1/4 turn, and I'm going to do the right side of this curve, and it's going to be darkest right at the line where I'm right up against here. And then I'll pull my ink outward to the right and fade it out. And I'm just going to pull it out until it gets faded. I'm not going to keep going into the end. So then I'm going to rotate it again, grab some more ink, and I'm going to put it right up against that line. And then finally my last one here, and pull it out. And then I went back in and added another layer of this black soot, and it just looks so cool and dimensional. The darker your shading, the more three-dimensional it's going to look. All right, for my next step, I'm going to color with the black soot on the inside of, just on the inside of this square. And this made it look like it was kind of a lip to this square, kind of coming up, and it goes down into this spiral. So it kind of gives a top to it. And then I colored it a little bit darker in the corners. If you make a mistake and you get too much ink, just add more water and then wipe it up with a tissue directly on the paper. For the next part, and this is the final part, I'm going to take some black soot and I'm going to draw a line on the right kind of half of these white areas in the next segment. And what this is doing is it's adding a reflection. So even though the reflection is actually gray, kind of grayish black, this black soot watercolor, it makes it look 3D. So it doesn't have to be a white reflection to look 3D. And I have a close-up photo on my blog post if you want to take a look at this. But I'm basically, you kind of have to get into a groove of how much ink you need on the aqua painter. And of course, you can always do this with a paintbrush, but I find it that you get more control with an aqua painter. So I'm going to keep grabbing this black soot and just drawing this line, and it's kind of off center, and it's, I have the close-up picture, I have to look at it, but it's kind of like 2/3 of the way to the right, and there's still some white on the right hand side. So it really just makes it look like it's round. And that's it for this. So I'm going to go ahead and put the sentiment on here from the You Are Set by Altenew. And I put it on acrylic block, and this is more of a trial and error trying to get it exactly the same as the curve of my square. So I kind of went back and forth for a little while until I thought it matched up pretty well. And you don't want to mess this up because you spent a lot of time on the Zentangle. So I'm going to make sure it's nice and secure in place. I went ahead and inked it up with some VersaFine Black Onyx ink. And I stamped it right underneath the square. And I did it kind of off to the left a little bit just for it to be a little bit interesting and not exactly in the center. I was so impressed at how easy it was to get really cool results with this type of art, I guess you would call it. And what I ended up doing was just leaving it as is for the card. I didn't add any matting. I just let the Zentangle speak for itself. For my next one, I stamped my sentiment already with some VersaFine ink, and I cut it out. And this is my practice sheet where I did a few before I started the video. And I'm going to use this pattern right here, this weave. And because I have this practice sheet, I can kind of see how I need to pattern it so that my You Rock sentiment is kind of off-center toward the right. And because this paper is thin, I can see through it. So I'm just going to kind of hold it up a little bit and put pencil marks on 4 of the different lines, or blocks I should say, so that I can measure them. And again, you're not probably supposed to be using rulers and making the measurements, but I find that when I'm doing any kind of grid, I really want to get the measurements down because it makes it a lot easier. So what I'm doing here is each square, from the beginning of one square to the beginning of the next square, is 1 inch. So you can see I've got 1 inch, and then I mark 3/16, so just kind of 3 tick marks, I guess you could say, on my ruler, and then I went up. And so here it is, if you could see. I wish I had zoomed in a little bit here, but it's on the 2 of my ruler. And so I'm going to start the next square at 1, and then I'm going to move to the right 3/16 of an inch. I didn't use the ruler for everything. I really just used it to create my grid, my basis for this whole thing, because if you don't have the right measurements at the beginning, I found this, it's really, really hard to make it look good. So once I had these measured, 1 row, I created another 2 rows, 1 above it and 1 below, with the same exact technique. So I'm just using 1 inch and then 3/16 of an inch for the square. And you can see I freehanded the rest of the square because you do want to make it look natural. You don't want everything measured out. So I did draw the squares by hand, and then I colored them all in with my 05 pen. Okay, so now I've got a good grid to start with, and everything from here on out will be much easier because I know everything is straight. For the pattern, you're going to start on the inside of the first square, then connect on the outside, then connect on the inside, and then connect on the outside. Now I'm going to move over 1, and I'm going to start opposite. So I'm going to start on the right side of this square and then connect on the left side. You can see I'm pausing here. I'm like, am I doing this right? And so you can see this is real time. So everything is very slow and methodical. So I'm going to fish this down at the bottom here. And now my next one is going to start opposite. So I'm going to start on the left side, and then the right, and then right side, left, right, left. Okay, now I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and I want an L here. So I'm going to go upward on the left side, and I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other side. So I'm just going to go right, and then left, connect, and then right, connect. And you have to move slowly because you have to connect these. And if you move fast and you draw a crooked line and you don't connect them, then it kind of messes up your pattern. But anyway, you can see how I have that L right there. And that's important for when you figure out where to start when you do your 90-degree turn. So because I start on the left side of the square, I'm going to start on the right side on this one, and then the left side on this one. And that completes the pattern. So again, you could leave it as is. It's a really cool drawing, but I added some shading and it looked amazing. I'm just so impressed with this whole art. I love it. So I have the Distress ink, black soot, and I'm just going to grab some, and I actually did 2 layers. So this is my first layer, and you can see I'm putting black where the weave goes under the piece next to it. So you kind of have to look at the pattern and figure out where it goes under and where it goes over. And everywhere you see something going under, that's where you want to put the ink. And I'm speeding this up a lot, like 20 times real time. But you can see how it comes together, and I keep turning and turning because I want to make sure I do it correctly. And if I do it at a certain angle, it's easier than doing it at a different angle. So now here I am. Now I'm going back in with another layer to make it darker, the shadowing darker, and it makes it look even more 3D. It's just so cool to see it come together in fast motion like this. Definitely the next vacation I go on, I am bringing these supplies with me, and this is what I'm going to do. All right, so here's the pattern. I love the way it looks. And so, you know, as I said, I just wanted the Zentangle to stand alone. So I just adhered these fully to a card base, so there's no matting or anything. And I used the corner of my Misty to get it lined up. And then I did the same thing for the grid pattern, the weave pattern. And I already put the ATG tape runner on there. You could mat with like a red or purple or something like that if you wanted to add something a little bit interesting. This is a really good masculine card too. And then I popped my sentiment up with some dimensionals. And that's it. So here's the card up close. It looks so 3D. It's just so amazing that this is so easy to do just by creating a technique and just methodically going through it. So I totally recommend getting either the books that I have or go to your bookstore. That really helps. There's a lot of online videos too of different patterns. So I encourage you to check it out and try it for yourself. I think you'll really like it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.